Aloha, and welcome to another video podcast of Up Laie. I'm your host, Luke Payne, and today we have an interesting intercultural communication topic. As you can see, it is a beautiful day here in Laie on the campus of BYU, Hawaii. Thanks for joining us, and let's dive in. This week, we have an interesting one, and one that many people have not thought about or taken time to study: the racial social hierarchy. Does your race play a large role in where you fit on the social hierarchy ladder? Today, we are going to find out and get to the bottom of this underlying issue that could be plaguing our society and culture. But first, what is a social hierarchy? I think everyone understands the word social hierarchy, but when we have to put a definition to it, it can definitely be a little bit of a difficult task. A social hierarchy is a social construct that determines where an individual fits in society. To put it simply, it is a list that essentially ranks people on how important they are in society. Well, with this being said, you might be asking yourself, well, who makes the rules? What are we ranked on? Maybe even where do you fit on this list? These are all questions that we've all asked ourselves, and we're going to try and answer them today. Well, there are many different factors that go into this construct of social hierarchy, but today we're going to focus on the racial aspect and try to determine if race is a large factor in determining the pecking order in the United States. Although we know that race is not biological or even genetic, it plays a large role in how we interact with others, where we live, and the stereotypes we each face on a daily basis. At the end of the day, race is a large determining factor for many parts of our lives. There are many different factors that go into where a person is placed in the social hierarchy here in the United States. And so we're going to look into each of them and see if we can understand the why. One of the biggest indicators of where a person ranks in our social hierarchy is how much money they make. Let's look at the median salary of a few races here in the United States. We're going to look at white, black, Hispanic, and Asian households, which cover the large majority of the population. The United States government did a 2020 census that told us the average salary of these four races. I'd like you to keep in mind that the United States Department of Health and Human Services have stated that in 2021, the poverty line for an average household is about $27,000 a year. With our first race, the United States government and the census that they performed said that the average Asian household made about $86,000 a year. Then we have white with about $66,000 a year. After that, we have Hispanic with about $51,000 a year. And then we have the average black household with about $42,000 a year. Before we dive in deeper and analyze these statistics, I would like to look at another set of stats, which are also play a large role into stereotypes as well as this construct of social hierarchy. I looked up the 2020 statistics from the Office of Justice program here in the United States, which did a study of crime rates by each race in 2020. These crimes are very broad, but they are considered the more serious crimes, such as rape, robbery, vandalism, prostitution, fraud, and embezzlement. I'd like you to keep in mind that these are rates, not just what percentage of the crimes are committed. And so the first one we have African Americans, which is about 6%. Then we have white, which is about 3%. Then we have Asians with a low number of about 0.7%. These numbers are very interesting numbers, and I think they speak largely to the social hierarchy here in the United States. To help us answer some of these tough questions, I would like to bring onto the show a good friend of mine to help us gain a little bit of a different perspective on this topic. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start off by asking you what your opinion is. Is there an underlying cause for the difference of these statistics? Or could it be that some cultures or races really do just work harder or even are maybe a little bit smarter than others that cause the differences and the variables in these statistics? What do you think?
That's a good question. I would say first, I think it has a lot to do with the culture you're brought up in and kind of like the factors that go into what your life is like. And so I think when you have these kids that are raised in inner cities where their families have had generational,
Well,
wealth for some and poverty for others. And so I think when, you've had generations of um, poverty in your family and not being able to find those opportunities and kind of capitalizing on opportunities, that's where you kind of find part of that crime rate. I think, in my personal opinion, like part of the, lack of education. I don't think it's that they're not capable of being as smart, but it's the lack of trying to further an education. And I think that's one of them. And I also would say, like, culturally as well, I mean, in Asian countries, they're more apt to push their children to pursue more of an education, to go for the degrees where they're going to medical school, where they're being lawyers, or like achieving things that are high paying jobs, which kind of obviously equates to the average household income. And then I also just think kind of a lot of it goes person by person basis, but I think overall a lot of it really does have to do with just kind of what you're exposed to culturally with your family.
Absolutely. Thank you. I love what you said about opportunities and really the different opportunities that really some different races try to provide for their children, or what's important to them, what's not. I think it does play a large role into the social hierarchy in the United States that we're looking at. Thanks so much for being on the show.
You're welcome.
I think that Sarah has helped us gain some really valuable perspective. I would like to dive a little deeper into one topic that all Americans know a little bit about, which is slavery. We all know that slavery was a terrible wrong that was done to African Americans in this country, but could it be that they're still paying the price? Slavery lasted for decades here, and African Americans were treated very, very poorly. They were given either no pay or minimal pay, and they were not given education, and they were forced to do manual labor for years. On January 1st, 1863, the 16th President of the United States of America, Abraham Lincoln, issued and signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which ended slavery and made it illegal here in the United States. This is one of the greatest acts in American history. Although all people were free, they were not all equal in the social hierarchy. The large majority of African Americans were free men without any savings, no education, and nowhere to work. While on the other hand, white people were little changed by the emancipation. There were still huge amounts of racism towards African Americans, and even though the law said that all people were equal, I think that the large majority of Americans at the time would not have agreed with that statement. African Americans, because of their lack of education, were only able to find blue-collar, low-paying jobs. In turn, African American communities couldn't build as nice as schools, couldn't provide as many opportunities for their children, and really overall had a lower quality of life. Throughout the years, African Americans have been able to become more educated, gain better access to schools and careers, but many, including myself, would argue that because of how far back they were set because of slavery, that it's a large reason why African Americans on average still earn less as well as have higher rates of crime. This is a specific case and isn't applicable to all races such as Asians and Hispanics, but it definitely makes you think a little bit about how our country is set up and potentially why certain races are in certain positions in today's world. While it is impossible to really come to a finite answer of whether race impacts where a person is placed on the social hierarchy ladder, we do have a lot of evidence. I personally believe that while racism has subdued a lot over the past decades, it plays a large factor in our lives still. I think it would be ignorant to say that race does not impact to some degree how your life turns out and where you fall in the social hierarchy ladder. I personally believe this to be a fact. I wish it were not. I believe that people should not be given certain disadvantages solely because of their race. I think that each one of us has a responsibility to make sure that we don't perpetuate a system that is unfair. We can do our part by being more accepting and inclusive of all people. I think that although this approach may take longer, eventually a social hierarchy based on race will be a topic of the past, and we can finally really stand behind the line, all men are created equal. Well, that's all we have for you today. Thank you for joining this episode of Wake Up Laie, and we'll see you next time. Aloha.